In 1816, an entire year passed without a summer. Crops failed across the northern hemisphere. Famine spread through Europe and North America. The official record attributes this to Mount Tambara's eruption in the Dutch East Indies, a volcanic event so powerful it injected enough ash and sulfur into the atmosphere to dim the sun for months. That explanation is accurate. It is accepted by climatologists, historians, and geologists alike. It appears in textbooks, academic papers, and government archives. But here is something those same archives note only in passing. In the decade immediately surrounding that event, the 1810s through the 1830s, hundreds of large, ornate public clock towers appeared across cities that had no postal system, no telegraph, and no coordinated municipal planning authority capable of organizing such a simultaneous undertaking. Not dozens, hundreds. And they were not primitive. They were precise. This documentary is built on documented architectural history, institutional records, and publicly available municipal archives. It does not claim to resolve what it examines. It examines because the record itself invites it. In 1817, the city of Philadelphia completed a clock tower visible from nearly every major intersection in its central district. That same year, nearly identical structures, same height category, same face proportions, same iron mechanism housings, were recorded in Lyon, France, in Leipzig, Germany, in Edinburgh, Scotland. Each city's records describe local craftsmen, local funding, and local civic initiative. No correspondence between these cities has ever been recovered connecting these projects to one another. What makes this notable is not simply that the clocks look similar. Architectural trends move across continents. Styles migrate. What draws attention is the infrastructure surrounding each installation. The platforms, the maintenance corridors, the weight-driven pendulum chambers, all engineered to specifications that exceeded anything the local civic records indicate these cities had previously built. Philadelphia's tower used a weight and gear system requiring tolerances of less than 1 millimeter. The craftsmen listed in the construction ledger had no documented prior experience with mechanisms of that complexity. The clock worked perfectly from the first day it was wound. Scale the observation outward and something accumulates. Between 1810 and 1850, public clock towers were erected in over 400 documented cities across Western Europe and North America. The standard historical interpretation frames this as a natural consequence of industrialization. Growing urban populations required coordinated time required public displays, and civic pride funded the architecture around those displays. That explanation holds for many cases, probably most of them. But industrialization did not proceed at equal speed across these regions. Rural counties in upstate New York were not industrializing at the same pace as Manchester. Small Bavarian market towns were not experiencing the same commercial pressures as Hamburg. And yet the clock towers appeared in both, at approximately the same time, with approximately the same structural ambition. In Canandaigua, New York, population under 3,000 in 1820, a clock tower was completed that used a mechanism more sophisticated than anything the Erie Canal engineers, working just miles away, had specified for their own timing infrastructure. The canal project, one of the largest public works in American history at that time, used simpler timekeeping. The small town had the more advanced clock. The timing raises questions that don't resolve neatly into any single explanation. In Britain, the pattern becomes particularly dense. Between 1815 and 1840, the number of public clocks in England and Wales increased by a documented factor of 6. Municipal records from this period show that many towns received clock towers before they received gas lighting, before they received organized police forces, and before they received the road improvements that would have made coordinated time economically necessary in the first place. The clock came before the need the clock was meant to serve. In several Lancashire mill towns, the clock towers predate the mills themselves. Workers were being regulated by public time before the factories existed to regulate them for. One historian noted this in an 1887 monograph on British civic architecture, describing it as an administrative curiosity, a phrase polite enough to avoid explaining it, specific enough to suggest he noticed something he could not account for. He did not pursue it further. cross the Atlantic and the pattern doesn't fracture. It continues. In Quebec City, Montreal, and Halifax, cities with distinct French and British administrative traditions, separated by significant distances and governed under different legal frameworks, public clock towers appeared within the same 15-year window. The mechanisms were different manufacturers. The architectural styles reflected local tastes. But the height-to-face ratio, the community positioning, and the maintenance access design all fall within a narrow band of specification that suggests, without proving, a common reference point somewhere upstream. No common reference point has been identified in the surviving records. What survives instead are the clocks themselves, still standing in many cases, their mechanisms replaced over generations, their towers restored, their original construction ledgers filed in archives that few researchers have had reason to cross-reference against each other. When you place those ledgers side by side, something becomes visible that individual city histories don't show. The question isn't whether these clocks were built. They were. The question is what kind of world needed to exist for them to appear this way, this simultaneously, this precisely, this far ahead of the systems we usually credit with making such coordination possible. That question points somewhere specific. There is a concept in infrastructure history called anticipatory building. The idea is straightforward. Sometimes institutions build ahead of visible demand. They construct roads before the settlements those roads will connect. They lay pipe networks before the population density that would justify the investment. They erect administrative buildings in locations that appear at the time of construction to be unremarkable. And then within a generation those locations become centers of commerce, governance, or transit. The standard explanation for anticipatory building is visionary civic leadership. Someone somewhere saw what was coming and built for it. That explanation works when you can identify the someone. When records show a mayor, a governor, a merchant guild, a railway company with a financial interest in growth. When the paper trail connects intention to outcome. It becomes considerably harder to apply when no such figure exists in the record, and the building happened anyway simultaneously, across nations that were not in documented contact with one another about the project. The United States in the 1820s was not a unified administrative state in any modern sense. It was a loose collection of semi-autonomous regions with different currencies in practical circulation, different road standards, different legal traditions inherited from different colonial powers, and communication networks so slow that news of a presidential election could take weeks to reach the western frontier. And yet, across this fragmented landscape, something moved with unusual coordination. The Erie Canal, completed in 1825, is one of the most studied infrastructure projects in American history. Its engineering is documented in extraordinary detail. What is discussed less frequently is what surrounded it. Along the canal's 363-mile route, towns that did not yet exist on maps in 1817 had, by 1823, not only been platted and partially settled but equipped with public timepieces, storage facilities built to standardized dimensions, and administrative buildings whose floor plans bore a striking resemblance to structures being raised simultaneously in the Hudson Valley, in coastal Massachusetts, and in western Pennsylvania, regions with no direct administrative connection to the canal project. The storage facilities are worth pausing on. Grain and goods warehouses built along the pre-canal route, before the canal existed to generate the trade volume that would fill them, were constructed to dimensions that matched, within inches, warehouses being built in Liverpool and Bristol during the same decade. American builders were not copying British blueprints. The Atlantic crossing took weeks. Technical drawings did not travel quickly or reliably. And yet the internal dimensions, bay widths, ceiling heights, loading dock proportions, fell within a range so narrow that modern architectural historians have described it as functionally identical. The word they typically avoid is coordinated. In Britain, the railway is usually credited with standardizing time. Before the railways, every English town kept its own local solar time. Bristol ran 10 minutes behind London. Oxford ran 5 minutes behind. This was not a problem when no one traveled faster than a horse. When trains began running fixed schedules in the 1840s, the chaos of local times became commercially dangerous. Timetables couldn't function if every station kept different hours. Railway companies began imposing railway time, standardized across their networks, and by 1847, most British stations were running on Greenwich Mean Time whether their local councils had voted for it or not. This is the accepted history. It is accurate. But the public clocks that were already standing in those towns, built in the 1810s and 1820s before the railways arrived, were already precise enough to synchronize with railway time the moment railways demanded it. They didn't need to be replaced. They didn't need to be upgraded. They were already built to a standard that the railway era would require, installed in an era that had no railways. The infrastructure preceded the need by 20 to 30 years. In engineering terms, this is not impossible. It is, however, unusual enough that it demands an explanation, and the explanations that exist are surprisingly thin. Civic pride and progressive municipal thinking appear frequently in the secondary literature. Primary sources, the actual construction records, the funding ledgers, the correspondence between local officials, are less illuminating. Many simply record that the clock was built, who laid the cornerstone, and how much stone was used. They do not record where the design specifications came from. The administrative similarity across regions is where the accumulation becomes difficult to dismiss as coincidence. Take the building typology now referred to as the Civic Hall, a structure combining public meeting space, administrative offices, and a clock or bell tower, built to face a central market square or public green. This typology appears in English market towns beginning in the late medieval period, which is expected. What is less expected is its appearance, in nearly identical functional layout, in cities founded by French colonists in North America, in cities founded by Dutch settlers in South Africa, and in cities built under Spanish colonial administration in South America, all within the same 50-year window of the early 19th century. Different colonial powers, different architectural traditions, different continents. The same building, performing the same civic functions, oriented the same way toward public space, with the same internal division between administrative and communal areas. One architectural survey conducted in the 1970s, covering civic structures built between 1800 and 1860 across 14 countries, found that the ratio of tower height to building footprint remained within a range of 3.2 to 3.8 across 94% of structures examined. The survey's author described this as evidence of a convergent civic aesthetic. She noted in a footnote that convergence of this precision across unconnected building traditions was theoretically remarkable, and left it there. Theoretically remarkable. The rail networks themselves carry a version of this pattern forward. British railway gauges, the distance between the two rails, were not standardized by any central authority when construction began in the 1820s. Different companies used different gauges based on the preferences of their engineers. Brunel's Great Western Railway famously used a broad gauge of 7 feet. Other companies used 4 feet 8.5 inches. The incompatibility created genuine commercial problems for decades. But in the United States, Canada, and Australia, where railways were being built at roughly the same time, the dominant gauge that eventually won out was 4 feet 8.5 inches. The same measurement, independently arrived at by railway companies in countries that were not, at that moment, coordinating their infrastructure standards through any documented international body. The gauge became the global standard. No one voted on it. No treaty established it. It simply emerged, across multiple countries, across multiple decades, as the measurement around which systems independently converged. Whether this reflects inherited knowledge moving through channels not captured in official correspondence, or genuine independent convergence on an optimal solution, is a question the historical record does not cleanly answer. What it does show is that the convergence happened. There is one more structural pattern worth naming before the picture becomes fuller. In both the United States and across Western Europe, the period between 1815 and 1845 saw the construction of water and sanitation infrastructure in cities where the population did not yet justify the investment. Aqueducts were built to capacities 2 and 3 times the contemporary population. Reservoir systems were engineered for cities that would not reach the relevant population density for another 40 years. Sewer networks were laid in districts that were not yet built. In each case, the expansion came. The cities grew into their infrastructure rather than building infrastructure in response to growth. This is not, on its own, mysterious. Forward-thinking engineering has always existed. But when you layer it, the clocks, the warehouses, the civic halls, the rail gauges, the water systems, all appearing within the same historical window, all slightly ahead of the demand that would justify them, all carrying a structural consistency that no documented coordinating body can fully account for, a different kind of question starts to form. Not a question about deception. Not a question about erasure. A question about inheritance. About whether what the 19th century was building was entirely new, or whether some of it was assembled from an existing template that the builders themselves may not have fully understood. There is a word that has come to be attached to that template. It is a word with a complicated history of its own, older than the internet debates that have recently made it famous, and far more specific in its original meaning than those debates typically acknowledge. What that word actually referred to, and why it matters to this conversation, is exactly where this goes next. The word Tartaria appears in European maps as early as the 13th century. It was not invented by internet forums. It was not coined by alternative historians working in the early 2000s. It appears in the cartographic traditions of medieval Europe as a geographic designation, a vast, loosely defined territory stretching across Central Asia, from the Caspian steppe eastward toward the boundaries of China. Marco Polo used a version of it. European royal courts used it in diplomatic correspondence. The word referred, imprecisely but consistently, to the lands dominated by Mongol and Turkic successor states following the fragmentation of the Mongol Empire. By the 17th century, maps were labeling enormous swaths of Eurasia as Great Tartary or Tartaria Magna. These were real places, inhabited by real people, governed by real political structures that European cartographers understood only partially and named with the vocabulary available to them. The word was geographical shorthand for the unknown interior, the part of the world that European institutional knowledge had not yet fully catalogued. That is its origin. Specific, documented, uncontroversial. What happened to the word in the 21st century is a separate story entirely. Beginning roughly in the early 2010s, a reinterpretation of Tartaria began circulating in online spaces, first in Russian-language forums, then spreading into English-language alternative history communities. This reinterpretation proposed something dramatically different from the cartographic tradition. That Tartaria was not simply a geographic designation but the name of a lost global civilization, technologically and architecturally advanced, that had been deliberately erased from the historical record sometime in the 18th or 19th century. The evidence cited for this reinterpretation was largely architectural, the same patterns this documentary has been tracing. The simultaneous appearance of ornate civic buildings, the over-engineered infrastructure, the stylistic consistency across unconnected regions. In the online reinterpretation, these anomalies were read not as historical curiosities but as physical remnants of a preceding civilization whose memory had been systematically suppressed. The theory grew. It acquired elaborations, mud floods, reset civilizations, orphan trains, repopulation programs. Each edition moved further from the documented record and further into the territory of unfalsifiable claim. By the mid-2010s, Tartaria online meant something almost entirely disconnected from what it had meant on 17th century maps. What is worth doing, and what is rarely done carefully, is separating the original observation from the interpretation that attached itself to it. The architectural anomalies are real. The documented record genuinely contains the patterns described in this film, the synchronization without visible coordination, the infrastructure preceding demand, the civic typologies appearing across unconnected colonial traditions, the mechanical precision in towns with no documented expertise to produce it. These observations come from architectural surveys, municipal archives, and peer-reviewed historical literature. They do not require any alternative framework to be acknowledged as genuinely puzzling. The leap from genuinely puzzling to deliberately erased global empire is where documentation ends and interpretation begins. and it is worth being precise about where that line falls. 3 interpretive models currently exist for these anomalies, and none of them has achieved anything close to consensus. The first is the convergence model. It holds that similar problems, how to organize civic space, how to build durable public timekeeping, how to engineer storage and water infrastructure, produce similar solutions independently across cultures, because the underlying physics and geometry of the problems don't offer many options. A clock tower that works must be a certain height to be visible. A warehouse that handles grain efficiently must have certain ceiling clearances. Convergence on this reading is not remarkable. It is what happens when competent engineers solve the same problem in different places. The convergence model is well supported by examples in other domains: bridge design, agricultural terracing, astronomical observation structures. Similar solutions appearing independently is a known phenomenon. What it struggles to account for is the timing compression, the way these solutions appeared not gradually and sequentially as independent invention would predict, but simultaneously within the same narrow historical window, across regions at vastly different stages of economic and institutional development. The second model is the diffusion model. It holds that knowledge, design templates, and technical specifications traveled more efficiently through the early 19th century than official records suggest. Merchant networks, Masonic lodges, military engineering corps, immigrant craftsmen carrying practical knowledge in their hands and heads rather than in documents. On this reading, the consistency is real, but the mechanism is human movement rather than mysterious coordination. Skilled people carrying standard practices from one city to the next, without the kind of paper trail that institutional history tends to preserve. The diffusion model is arguably the most historically grounded of the 3. Knowledge has always moved through informal networks. The 19th century had rich ones. Its limitation is that the specific anomalies, the towns that had no documented connection to any such network, the mechanisms built by craftsmen with no prior experience of their complexity, sit at the edges of what diffusion alone can explain. The third model is the inheritance model. It does not require a lost empire. It does not require deliberate erasure. It simply holds that the 19th century may have been working, in part, from physical templates, existing structures, surviving mechanisms, architectural forms, whose origins predated the institutional memory of the communities that used and extended them. Not a conspiracy. Not a cover-up. A gap between what was built before and what the written record managed to capture about who built it and why. The inheritance model is the least developed of the 3 because it is the hardest to test. Proving that a building incorporated or replicated an earlier template requires finding the earlier template. And by definition, if the template predates the records cannot confirm it. Return for a moment to 1816. The year without a summer. The failed harvests. The famine that moved through Europe and North America and left in its wake an extraordinary burst of civic construction. The decade that followed produced more public buildings, more infrastructure, more coordinated urban development than the several decades preceding it, in regions that had just experienced catastrophic agricultural collapse and should, by any economic logic, have been consolidating rather than expanding. The clocks that appeared in that decade are still there. Many of them. Their faces worn, their mechanisms replaced, their towers restored by generations of people who preserved them without fully knowing why they mattered enough to preserve. They kept time through everything that followed. Through industrialization. Through 2 world wars. Through the complete reorganization of the political systems that originally commissioned them. Whatever they were built to coordinate, or to remember, or to signal, or simply to measure, they are still measuring it. The honest position looking at all of this is not certainty in any direction. It is not certainty that a lost civilization explains the patterns. The documented record does not support that conclusion.